Hello and welcome to this creative video workshop on character, story and animation. In this video, we're going to take a look at telling the tale. We're going to use the two characters we've created to develop a story. We're going to write down that story and perhaps make some little scenes or illustrations to go with it that we'll then use to create an animation. So in this video, you are going to need a pen or a pencil and some paper, any colours you might have. It's a bonus if you have coloured card or paper too, but not essential, and you'll need some scissors to cut certain bits out. The way I've done my story and the little scenes that go with it in this video is a good way to do it because we can use the little backdrops and cut out characters that I make really easily to create the animation in later videos. Just something to bear in mind. Okay, have fun. There are 4 steps to creating a story based on the 2 characters we've created so far. The first step of the story is to introduce your character, what they love and their hopes and dreams. Then we're going to introduce your friend or foe and any potential for conflict. Then there's going to be a conflict, and then there is a resolution or cliffhanger. We're going to go through these one by one. As we answer these questions, start to write down your story so you've got it written somewhere. So the first thing to do is to introduce George Peanut, what he loves and his hopes and dreams. This is very, very simple, what I've written. George Peanut loves to sing. He dreams of one day becoming a professional singer. An introduction to the character and something about their personality so we can learn a little bit about them. Next, we have to introduce your friend or foe and a potential element of conflict. Here's David Biscuit, George's next door neighbour, and here's my little bit of writing where he comes in. One day, while George is practicing his singing, he hears a knock on the door. George answers the door. It's George's neighbour, David Biscuit. David Biscuit loves peace and quiet and hates being distracted. So here I've introduced the neighbour by just having him knock on the door, and I've also introduced the potential for a conflict by telling everyone David's love of peace and quiet and hatred of being distracted. So we can now see that George is singing and David's love of peace and quiet is going to create a conflict. Our next box. This is going to create a conflict and you're going to have to write about it. This is mine. David looked angry. If I keep getting distracted, I'll never pass my exams. Oh dear, said George. If I don't practice, I'll never be a good enough singer. So there's the conflict. I've really spelled it out. David can't have the distractions or he won't pass his exams, but George has to sing so he can be good enough. How are they going to resolve this conflict? You can have a resolution or a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger is where something exciting is about to happen, but we don't get to see what that is. For mine, I've come up with a resolution to this conflict between David and George. I need peace and quiet, shouted David. Why don't you revise at the library? It's silent in there, replied George. The library? What library? Asked David. It's just down the road. You'll love it. David discovered the library and it became his favourite place. So that's my really simple story based on my 2 characters, elements of their personality, their hopes and dreams, loves and hates, and a conflict that they had about those aspects of their personality. So you need to make sure you've got a little bit written down. You can probably be much more imaginative than me. You could make your story a bit longer. You could even add another character if you like. But because we're planning to do some animations around this, I do recommend that you keep it pretty simple. Don't go too crazy. If you want to illustrate your story, That would be really, really lovely. I'm going to use some of the backgrounds and facial expressions and characters I've cut out to illustrate this story now, so I can show you what it will look like with some pictures, and you ought to make one too. So, George Peanut loves to sing. He dreams of one day becoming a professional singer. So here is my first picture for my illustration of the first part of my story. Now I've made mine out of stuff that I'd already made. You can do that if you like and take a picture, or you could stick it down, or you could just draw a different illustration for each part of the story if you liked. If you do stick it down, you might need to make some of these things again when we create our animation. Illustration number 1. Next. One day, while George is practicing his singing, he hears a knock at the door. George answers the door. It's his neighbour, David Biscuit. David loves peace and quiet and hates being distracted. A simple illustration there, with my David character and George on the left. Next part of the story, the conflict. David looked angry. Stop all that singing. If I get distracted, I'll never pass my exams. Oh dear, said George. If I don't practice, I'll never be a good enough singer. And at that moment, I'm going to illustrate George being an awful singer. His worst nightmare. Next part of the story. I need peace and quiet, shouted David. Why don't you revise at the library? It's silent in there, replied George. The library? What library? Asked David. It's just down the road, you'll love it. David discovered the library and it became his favourite place. Another very simple illustration for that part of the story. And then I've got my little secret part at the end. David ended up doing so well in his exams that he was able to become an astronaut. And that was the dream and ambition that I set for David in an earlier video. The end.